Hello, my love. We meet again.
Yes.
Are you so excited for today's chat?
Actually, I really am.
I know. Well, why don't you introduce the topic for the day?
Okay, so today we're going to talk about neurodivergency, autism, and ADHD, what neurodivergency means versus neurotypical, and the different lenses that we've seen that, throughout a relationship, and also how we manage the dynamics of that within our relationship.
Mm-hmm.
So
Great.
I'm super excited because well, it's going to become apparent as we talk about this further, but this is like my latest special interest. So of course I'm like pumped to be able to like info dump on everyone about everything I've been learning. But I want to preface this conversation for anyone who may be finding our podcast and doesn't know us personally through other ways that we work, that neither one of us is an expert in the medical aspects of autism or ADHD or any other kind of neurodivergent diagnoses. We are two people who resonate with some of the aspects of these diagnoses, the lived experience of someone with neurodivergency. So please take everything that we say as just our lived experience and our own research that's hasn't been done in a lab or in a university or in a scientific setting. So
right.
And I think know that.
Right. And I think as will become apparent, well, at least from my end, as you and I have had our sort of preparatory discussions about this, it's clear to me that everything that you've been sharing, I then in turn sort of filter through my expertise, which is spirituality and psychology. And so we'll talk about how these, constellations of symptoms and ways of being neurologically sort of map up against certain spiritual and or psychological descriptors as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's going to be very good.
And then I in turn have a preface, a caveat, perhaps, if you will, that, as you and I have had these discussions, it's clear to us that you and I really anchor the sort of two poles of perception of this material, right? And so I want to honor that by sharing my perspective on the things that you're sharing my experience, sharing how what you have pointed out to me has resonated and where I sort of run into conflict with it. And so it'll be a very frank and honest sharing, and it might come across to people as if we're disagreeing or arguing even, God forbid. And it's important to understand that we're not. And if you want to understand more about how that can be, there's lots of our previous podcasts that people can listen to understand concepts like the tension of opposites, understanding non-duality as a whole, the importance of perspective. And so a lot of that's going to show up here. And true to the name of the podcast, the she and the he part, and true to our sort of original intent with that, you have what could be described as the feminine way of being with this particular material. And then I have a tendency to have the more sort of masculine perspective on it. And neither one of them is right or wrong any more than being male or female is somehow more right or wrong than the other. They're just two different ways of being with something. And they represent the two polarities of expression in duality. So, okay, that's enough rambling on my part.
The other ironic that you said that I have the more feminine perspective and you have the more masculine perspective. I think the irony for me is, as I'm describing my experience, which is more of an autistic experience, that is a more masculine expression.
You're right.
It's super
Yeah.
logical and linear and organized. And
Yeah.
so even within our own experience, we have this
Yeah.
interesting dynamic.
Yep. Mhm.
It'll make sense as we go. So the first thing I want to do is just define a few things for people, because there's going to be a lot of people here watching that don't have any understanding or minimal understanding of what autism, ADHD, and neurodivergency mean. So the first thing to know is that neurodivergency is a non-medical term. It was coined by a sociologist in the 90s. It's meant to describe people whose brain has developed in a different way or has a different like structure and or function than what is considered neurotypical. And that is based on research and evidence, not just the assumption of normality.
Mm.
So one of the things that people run into as they're trying to describe being neurodivergent is that everyone says, oh, everyone's a little autistic, or everyone's a little ADHD, or everyone's a little neurodivergent,
Right.
when in fact there is a thing that is called a neurotypical brain. Like, it is a legit thing in science that can be measured and quantified.
Hmm.
And then there are brains that are different from that in a variety of ways. However, there's another term called neurodiversity, which explains that every person's brain is a little different from one another. So the way that we determine whether someone's neurodivergent or not is whether there's enough differences from the so-called norm that
Hmm.
they meet this qualification of being neurodivergent. And you
And
can measure that. Go ahead, sorry.
is there a firm statistic on, I mean, is it an actual quantifiable?
It's not super quantifiable, except, there are, and I'm going to go through them, diagnostic criteria for different kinds of neurodivergency, that you have to meet these criteria. And the problem with that is that those criteria are created by people who are neurotypical for the most part. So it becomes a whole like can of worms there about what, are those real criteria? Are these the criteria that matter, that are truly measurable and researchable? And that's a whole other can of worms. Anyways, so most people agree that there are certain qualities that make you neurodivergent, certain ways of expressing and thinking and interacting, that if you meet about 60% or more of them, you can reasonably say that you have a neurodivergent brain. And if you cannot, then you can reasonably say that you have a neurotypical brain.
Okay. Um, the symptoms, so to speak, are not quantifiable. There's sort of a qualitative, evaluative. You have to, on your own or with the help of somebody, sort of decide, does this descriptor fit me? So that's relatively subjective. But then there's a quantifiable part where you have to meet X number, X percentage of these subjective criteria. And that is sort of what, when one could choose, if they so desire, to sort of stamp themselves with one of these particular labels. Sure.
It is a mix of subjective and objective measurements. Some of the objective measurements are the presence or absence of certain things like that you can see in the world, like stimming. Stimming is a quality that actually both ADHD people and autistic people do. That's fidgeting, can be blinking, can be making like little noises, like funny little repetitive noises, can be wiggling, dancing. Like people watching this have seen me stim many times. I'm always shifting, moving, putting my hand on my face, playing with my hair. Like there's a lot of things that I do unconsciously and consciously that are a part of this. So there are objective things you can see. So are there the presence of stims? Are there the presence of these behaviors that can quantify, I guess, to some degree, what level of severity of autism that you have? The problem with ADHD and autism together and other kinds of neurodivergent conditions is that people pretend and mask and hide a lot of their the coping strategies and traits of these conditions. So if you're a person watching a child, for instance, in a school setting who has been socialized to sit still and not do what they would normally naturally do, they're going to look neurotypical.
Mm.
And so that's one of the difficulties of diagnosis, is that you almost have to, when you go in for a diagnosis, or if you're a person diagnosing, you have to look at this person in the context of their worst day, not their best day, not when they're following all the rules and all. And you have to ask lots of questions about the inner experience, which is very subjective. So, and we'll get into more of that as we go. So some of the kinds of neurodiversity, neurodivergence are things like autism, ADHD, dyslexia is a part of this, which is difficulty reading. Dysgraphia, some people have a very hard time writing like with their hands, so they have to type or do something else, or maybe they do voice to text. Dyscalculia, which is issues with math. You can't do math. Like you have to have elaborate systems so that you can do any kind of math, which I kind of resonate with, honestly. Dyspraxia, which is difficulties with coordination. These are your people who are clumsy. They're always bumping into things, falling down, getting injured frequently. And then people can just have sensory processing disorders without the relational difficulties. They can just be very sensitive to sounds or lights or textures, things like that. And Tourette's is also in this category of neurodivergency. And so ADHD and autism and other kinds of neurodivergency often overlap. The research estimates that 70% of people who have autism also have ADHD and vice versa. So there, and I'm going to show a picture in a second of like what that looks like, some of the traits that overlap. And often they also correspond with mental illness diagnoses. So people who have neurodivergent brains as they're growing up, because they present differently and act differently and think differently, there can be a lot of trauma that is associated with thinking and being different in the world. And so they may develop mental health issues as a result of trying to cope. So there's a lot of misdiagnosis that happens, especially there's kind of a typical autism presentation, for instance, and there's an atypical autism presentation. The typical presentation tends to be more in men and boys. The atypical presentation tends to be more in women and people who identify as non-binary. The other thing to know is that people of color often are misdiagnosed, and that I think that has to do with racism, to be honest. They're much more likely to get borderline personality diagnosis or bipolar, because I guess there's no research on it, and people don't understand the cultural implications, and there's just a lot of difficulty. So a lot of women and POC are missed. And so the old estimate of 5 boys to every 1 girl is missing an entire population of atypical autistic people. So, and the other thing to know is that ADHD, there are 11 types. It's not just one presentation. It's not just ADD and ADHD. ADD is attention deficit disorder, where you have focus issues. ADHD is attention deficit plus hypersensitivity and being, overstimulated. But then there's literally like 11 types of that. So wow. You can be like in a really niche area, of that one diagnosis. So anyways.
So do you want to share a little bit about, you referenced atypical and typical. What are the hallmarks of those? Sure.
Let me start with ADHD, because that's at least a little bit more cut and dry.
Okay.
Because there's not really an atypical and an typical. It's like most people with ADHD really have these issues or have these challenges. So people with ADHD, they often have poor listening skills. So you're talking to them and they've drifted off into their own world. And then you don't realize that they're not listening until like you're much further along in the conversation. Because they're really like deep in their own experience and in their own like feeling state. They lose things all the time. And that has to do with, spatial awareness, visual awareness, and just memory difficulties. Symptoms, I should say also, all of these symptoms are worse when you're stressed and dysregulated. And all of these are much, much better when you're, on vacation or calm or doing a lot of things for yourself to be, regulated.
Right.
People with ADHD get distracted very easily, sidetracked very easily. It's like you're on your phone and you're looking something up, and then something else interests you, and you're like following that breadcrumb. And then so you're bouncing around to things a lot, or you start multiple tasks and you don't finish the one because you remember you have to do this other thing first. And it creates a lot of disorganization, and executive functioning can be difficult, planning and organization. They forget to do things entirely. A lot of ADHD people struggle with self-care tasks. That's what I see like across the board. Not having the energy to take a shower, not remembering to brush their teeth, not forgetting to eat is a huge problem for people with ADHD and autism. They just literally don't think of it, or they're so focused on something that they've forgotten. Trouble with attention, trouble with focus. Difficult time finishing schoolwork or following instructions, because sometimes the brain is moving so fast, it's like skipping the middle steps. Avoiding things that require concentration. So anything that you have to like focus on and you're not interested in focusing on it, you'll kind of put that thing off as much as you can until you can't anymore. People with ADHD often thrive under pressure. So they'll be able to focus and do things very well, but they're going to save it to the very last moment and then like rush through it. And usually successfully, sometimes very successfully, and other times it's a big problem. They're going to have some thoughtless mistakes, failing to focus on details. They're very big picture thinkers. So the little tiny things that you need to check, the boxes that you have to check, you're going to miss some of those. And so in school, that looks like not fully following the instructions, missing a step here and there. And so getting, something wrong in a test because you missed that little detail of direction. They can be very restless. You can have difficulty staying still, and you can interrupt frequently. So you're having a conversation with someone, and if they're like interrupting you a lot, or just not reading the conversation well, trying to get it out of their minds before they forget it, then that's a sign that there's maybe some of this going on. They tend to be very poorly organized and not know how to get going in that department. So people with ADHD might need to create organization for them. I've seen online some people with ADHD have set up laundry baskets in every room of their house. So there's literally a place for them to put their dirty laundry everywhere. So it's not just in piles and, just messing up the whole house. And they tend to be fidgety and that's again the stims. And they're often highly sensitive and overwhelmed. So very sensitive to stimulation, like sensitive to sound, noise, and emotions. And at the same time, and this is also true for people with autism, sensory seeking. So wanting to have, to feel alive, to have a strong sensation, loud noises, loud music, crunchy food, food with a very strong texture, some kind of like chewy food, crunchy food. That's like common for people with ADHD. All of those things. And there's lots more. I just tried to take like the most common things.
Okay.
So on a diagnosis, you'd have to meet at least 6 of these criteria to be diagnosed.
6 of the
long list that I gave.
So.
Yeah.
Okay. So, I mean, that raises for me sort of the central issue that I have with this, which again doesn't mean I'm saying it's wrong, right? This is for everybody listening. But I want to be clear about where my stumbling blocks are with this as I listen to you and as I have listened to you, because I think people listening are going to be having similar experiences, right? If you haven't considered this for yourself before and you hear this, some people might just jump right on board, and other people might be really sort of resistant and not quite grasping the implications, et cetera. And so I want to just be able to give voice to my process with all of this. So first, let me ask this.
Mm-hmm.
To me, I hear you describe these things, and I hear a sort of list of deficits, areas of struggle, right?
Mm-hmm.
And philosophically speaking, I think everybody has certain areas of struggle. So one of the questions is, why are these particular areas somehow special and deserving of a label? And then at the same time, in a list of 20 things, if you just meet 6 of them, somehow that means that this label applies to you, right? And so that's where I struggle. I struggle with labels, period, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the background on this conversation for everybody listening is you said to me, like, you were really diving into this, researching it, and you basically said you have ADHD. Right. I mean,
I
it wasn't that
definitely did not tell you that you have
well,
ADHD.
it wasn't that quick, and but let's just ask, do you believe that I have ADHD?
My personal belief is that I should not be diagnosing or labeling anyone else,
For
no matter what. I think you
since
match these characteristics, and
okay.
I think you match them because you have told me that these are things that you have struggled with,
Yeah,
do struggle with. This is a long-standing pattern that you've had for
for
most of your
sure.
life. That's one of the diagnostic criteria. This can't be like you had a bad year, you had a bad day, and these
Yeah, I
things
mean,
showed up.
there's no doubt. First, when I ask that question, right, for most people, it's not an appropriate question. For you, our conversations, I'm just gonna spoil it for everybody. I know that you label me sort of ADHD to the extent that it's appropriate given all of the things that you're sharing, and I don't care, right? It doesn't bother me. And certainly when I just listen to the list, I go, check. I mean, I have probably 15 of the 20 things that
Mm-hmm.
you listed, right? So I have a personal aversion with labels. So that's the sort of one early caveat up front.
Mm-hmm.
And I have no judgment about if people sort of feel into this and the label does fit, fine,
Mm-hmm.
great. But I would exercise, or I would recommend exercising the same caution that I do to people with any label, which is to just be careful that you don't imprison yourself in the label, right? If the label
Mm-hmm.
is appropriate and helpful in your self-exploration, great. But for me and where I am, I sort of am stuck with the juxtaposition here of these things that you've listed and going, yeah, I mean, basically you described me, right? Most of that is an accurate description of me. And I also don't, the idea that I have ADHD, I'm still struggling with. And again, I'm just sharing my experience because other people might have the same experience. I'm not denying it. But this leads me back to what my sort of original question was, or one of my 2 original questions here is, this is all sort of portrayed, and maybe this is my misperception, but when I hear this portrayed and when I hear it talked about, it's the energy of it is that it's a disability.
Mm-hmm. I
Is
have
that
lots to say about this. Yeah.
is great. So why don't you
Yeah.
dive into that? Because I think it would be helpful. It would be helpful for me in terms of grasping some
Sure.
of this, and
Yeah.
certainly I think so. So what is the conventional wisdom about this? I mean, certainly to me, I hear people talk about it, right, as it's a disability. It's like, I can't go run sprints with you. I have an artificial knee, a bum leg. Whatever. I fractured my leg when I was 9 and it doesn't work the same way. It's like an objective disability. What is the literature and teaching around that?
Okay. Well, first of all, nobody goes in to get an ADHD or an autism diagnosis unless they're struggling immensely in their life.
Okay.
So you do not require an ADHD diagnosis, nor do I require an autism diagnosis. We
Okay.
don't need that because we are doing okay in our lives.
Mm-hmm.
So people go in to have these, it's just like any other diagnosis. There's a constellation of symptoms. People have, found patterns and created a way to describe the patterns that they're seeing and experiencing. And it can be useful for someone with no awareness of the pattern to go in and see a neuropsychologist, for instance, and for that neuropsychologist to say, oh, like everything you're stating is difficult for you and upsetting for you is part of this constellation that we call ADHD. And because we know it's part of this constellation, here are all of these resources that other people with ADHD have found to be helpful in helping to support you in your differences and empowering you in those differences and helping give you tools. So
yeah,
that's the reason why people go and get diagnosed.
Okay. I love that. I am in full agreement with that. It makes perfect sense. I don't diagnose people in any sense for a living.
No, nor do I.
But I do have the conversations with people about, in therapeutic settings, like, okay, this thing that you're describing, it sounds a lot like this. Like, let's give this thing a name so that you can understand that this isn't some personal shortcoming, a defect within yourself, that this is in fact something that's well understood, prolific in society. There's research on it, there's literature, and there's ways to work with it. And that can be very helpful to people to go, oh, I just thought I was totally screwed up in a way that nobody else could possibly understand. Turns out the opposite is true, that this is so well understood and so common that there's a stamp, right, that that fits.
Yeah.
So yeah, I agree that can be very helpful. I also wonder if that isn't a particularly rosy, optimistic description that you just gave. I don't know, but my sense with people is that isn't really how they're engaging with that. But that's not necessarily a criticism of the diagnoses and the criteria, et cetera. That just has to do with people's own personal misunderstandings or miscommunication from professionals, et cetera. But it does point to my concern with this, which I don't need you to resolve. It's a personal thing. just that I see people taking this label and sort of running with it in a way that I guess doesn't make sense to me, because what's the difference? And I know I'm getting philosophical here, but what's the difference for somebody like me who has most of these? Like, forget 6, I've got 18 of the 20 or 25 things, right? But I managed to function pretty well in life, right? So
here's a caveat here, okay? For a lot of people, they get by great. And they get by great because they have either learned life skills or they have people around them that greatly support them. You and I are a really good team.
True. Yeah.
So you have areas that are difficult for you that I help you with, and I have areas of difficulty that you help me with.
Yeah, there's no doubt.
So we have adapted really well. We have taken I want to add that people with ADHD are incredibly intelligent and incredibly gifted and incredibly creative. And they have contributed vastly to the world. And if you look up, famous people with ADHD, you'll see some of the most incredible like thinkers.
Mm.
Same with autism. I mean, Elon Musk has autism. Like
Yeah.
he's created incredible things for our world.
Yeah.
And nobody would look at him and think he's disabled.
Right.
However, some people, because they don't have the resources that they need, they don't have a partner to support them, or they haven't figured out how to work with their difficulties yet, do consider themselves to be disabled by their ADHD.
Mm.
And so the work of therapists, mentors, support people is to help a person, if possible, not feel disabled by their condition.
Mm-hmm.
Like you and I are not disabled by our neurodivergency, if we even want to say that we have that. I don't feel disabled by that. There are
Sure.
times when I'm like, this is very challenging,
Yeah.
but I don't
I mean,
feel like my life is stopping in some way.
right. There's no doubt that I recognize that the constellation of these behaviors and symptoms, right, make my life more difficult than it needs to be or could be otherwise. There's no doubt about that. I can't deny that. So I get that part of it. Yeah. I
If you
guess,
didn't have the adequate support for the things that were hard for you, or if you hadn't learned tools to work with them, you would have a much harder life.
yeah, and I guess I need to consider where that came from, and I haven't spent a lot of time with that, right? I mean, I went to really high level academic institutions, but they didn't really teach me how to study per se, and in fact, my lack of ability to really buckle down and study in college was a problem for me. I coasted through high school because I could get straight A's in my sleep.
Yeah.
And then I
Super
got to
intelligent brain.
the university and level where everybody was that smart, and I went, shit, this isn't working at all. But so I'm just trying to feel into like where is it that I gathered the particular sort of resources or skills that you're referring to. That is just something I'll need to, right? What is it that separates me? And maybe the answer is nothing, I guess. What is it that separates me from the people who are really struggling with the same constellation of symptoms, right? Because
Well,
it's not like and this is important, it's not like I'm willpowering my way through these difficulties. They continue to be difficulties and they continue to be problems for me.
Yeah.
I am exceptionally disorganized. I lose things all the time. Other things that you said, and I know it's not, it doesn't have to be sort of a all comprehensive one for one.
Thoughtless mistakes. Yeah.
But let me bring up one particular manifestation in me, because it brings up again a larger philosophical question about this. The part about listening, right? There are times and places where that's definitely true for me, but almost universally, it's because, to be frank, I just don't give a shit. If I'm not listening, it's because I don't care what you're saying. It's not because I'm incapable of listening. I listen for a living.
Yeah.
And when I'm sitting across from a client, I am deeply invested in what they're saying. And I'm picking out all sorts of details of language use and energy and body language and helping to build a picture based on that I sort of share back with them. And people think that I'm sort of reading their mind or whatever. And it's like, no, I'm just listening. I'm just paying attention. So in situations like that, I have this incredible ability to do that. And then other times, there's no doubt that people will talk and I'm just like, I couldn't repeat back to them what they've said to me, but almost without exception, it's because I just don't care what they're saying.
Sure.
And often it's because I detect that they don't really care whether or not I'm listening, right? People just talk. People just talk to talk, and they're venting, dumping, whatever. And I'm just, okay, waiting for you to, right? Like,
be done.
Well,
Wrap
I'm
it
sorry
up.
that you had a rough day. Here's a hug. Go about it, my business now, right? So all of this is there is a
So
point
you're
here.
wondering, like, what is the differentiation between, the not caring and the ADHD
That,
quality of
that's right. And I've
difficulty
talked
listening.
about this in previous episodes about my personal process, because a lot of these things that through this particular lens are described as ADHD happen to map perfectly to my Myers-Briggs typology,
Mm-hmm.
which is an INFJ,
Mm-hmm.
which means that my inferior function of the four ways of engaging with the world, the one that I'm worst at is extroverted sensation. That is
Mm-hmm.
perceiving the world and responding to it through my sensory experiences. What am I seeing? What am I feeling? What am I hearing? And can I keep track of all of that and manage all of that? And the answer is more often than not, no. Right? Like, I will move things and put things down without having any conscious sense of having done that. I will be bleeding and you will have to point it out to me. And I'll go, I don't know when I started bleeding there. Right.
Yeah.
So there's all sorts of things that show up within me that through a different lens are described as having extroverted sensation as an inferior function, right? That through this lens are now, okay, it also happens to be consistent with ADHD. And so like with my inferior function, as I've talked about, I have found ways to choose to work with that. Now, it's still my inferior function,
Mm-hmm.
but there's no doubt for me that a lot of it has to do with, well, maybe I'm giving, even as I talk through this, maybe I'm giving too much credit to personal choice and consciousness here. Because frankly, if it was that much within my personal domain, I'd probably fixed a lot of this stuff by now, because it does interfere with my life.
Yeah.
But I can pay attention to it. It's like the listening. I can do it if I want to. I
Sure.
can pick up, I can vacuum the house if I want to.
Yeah.
Right. There are a lot of experiences like you have described of, I just don't see the cabinets open. Like, it literally
Right.
doesn't enter my field of vision and I just move on with my life. There's other times, it's probably 50-50, where I'm perceiving and I just don't give a shit. I don't care enough to do something about it. And maybe, so that's my question, I guess, is that part of the constellation, right? Is the I don't give a shit enough to do something part of the defining feature of either
Yeah. Actually, it
extroverted
is.
sensation inferior function or
Yeah.
ADHD? It's not that I can't do it. It's just not important enough to me. I
You
see my
know,
dirty bedroom.
yeah.
I see the basket of clothes that you've described. It's just not important enough for me right now to do something about it. So tell me
So,
about that.
okay, sure. So, again, there's a lot of overlap with these different kinds of neurodivergent traits.
Okay.
So, your ability to focus and even hyper focus is both consistent with, and I like this terminology that you've said, consistent with, because that is more like, instead of pointing at it, that's ADHD, you can say it's consistent with this.
Mm-hmm.
So the ability to hyper focus and have the will to the organization to look at something and listen very carefully is both one of the gifts of ADHD and it's one of the gifts of autism. So
Okay.
it's what the ability to have the strength to and the interest to hyper focus on something that you're interested in is one of the benefits, so to speak. It's one of the benefits of having a neurodivergent brain.
Okay.
It's more than the focus of a neurotypical brain. It's actually incredibly focused.
Okay. I mean, I like this because, again, it's starting to address one of my concerns, which is the viewing of this, at least um, amongst the general population, the layperson, as being strictly a disability, right? When
Yeah.
in fact, I like the sort of shift here in energy that if you think about a bell curve and I know it's not that clean, I know you'll get into that, but for the time being, or a spectrum, so to speak, that being neurodivergent means being towards one end, and that means the loss of function on the other end, but it also means heightened acuity around the functions at the
Mm-hmm.
particular end that you're, sort of deviating towards. And so it's, the blessing and the curse, so to speak. And I like that lens a lot better. That makes this an easier thing for me to sort of swallow and work with, not just within myself,
Yeah.
but more broadly speaking. Yeah.
And I'm moving toward that point. That's like towards the end of my info dump.
I jumped the gun.
It's
Okay.
fine. I mean, but so if basically, I'll say it now, if you can work with these differences in your brain and you can embrace them and you can support yourself in them, you can use the benefits of having ADHD or autism and create something incredible and be very, very, very successful in the world. But you have to accept and not have resistance around the difficulties. And
I
and
love
it
that.
might look like you're not in balance in your life.
Mm-hmm.
You're rejecting these harder things and getting support on them and like leaning into the good stuff. And that kind of goes against the narrative of our culture that you should always be working on your weaknesses and, you know, like the strengths are easy, like lean into the weaknesses.
Yeah.
And so I think that's one of the problems if you're neurodivergent, that you have this kind of rhetoric that might work for a neurotypical population, but if you're neurodivergent and you have these amazing areas of strengths and you have some things that are much harder for you and make your life hell, like why would you not support yourself in the areas that make your life hell and really, really shine in the areas that make your life and everyone else's life amazing?
Yeah. I mean, certainly, I am increasingly in agreement with that. Not exclusively. I still think that there's tremendous benefit. I think it's more how we engage with the deficits, the
Mm-hmm.
weaknesses, the inferior function aspects. It's whether we perceive ourselves to be in a battle with them, whether it's a constant fight, or whether there is the energy of recognizing where the weaknesses are, understanding how they sneak up and grab us, finding ways to accommodate them. Actually, like you're describing, is actually a way of lovingly working with them.
Mm-hmm.
But also at the same time, making some effort into understanding where those imbalances are coming from, and maybe not calling it an imbalance, but where the weakness is coming from, and engaging in some sort of process to help elevate that a
Make yourself
little bit.
successful. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm not saying
Um,
like if you don't like putting your laundry away, you completely abdicate all laundry responsibility, everything to do with your laundry to
yeah.
someone else. It's
Right.
like, okay, no, you know you struggle in this area. If you can get some support, get the support you can. And for whatever else that you can't get support on, develop a system that works for you.
Hmm.
Figure out a way to support yourself in that.
Hmm.
So I think it'll be easier for me to talk from my own lived experience if I move on to autism and explain the signs and symptoms of that, both atypical and typical.
Great.
And I would be easily able to tell you why some of these traits are a struggle for me and how they're also a gift. Because I see them much like dualistically. Like these things are
Mhm.
hard and they also are why I am good at what I do.
Mhm.
And I've found like a lovely way of being in my life and in my career because of these traits. I'm trying not to call them symptoms because symptoms are like negative sounding to me.
Yeah.
So I'm using the word traits to just as a attributes, traits, something
Yeah.
like that.
To me, I like that. I also like, as the more that we've talked about this, I like the word deficit, because it does describe my experience. My ability to engage with the world through extroverted sensation is at a deficit.
Mm.
But to your point, understanding how the Myers-Briggs Jungian typology works, it's specifically because we sort of have a slider, so to speak, in these two categories, because if this is extroverted sensation over here, because I'm so far away from extroverted sensation as a function, I'm very close to introverted intuition, and so this becomes a gift, right?
Mm.
um, the caveat with this is that working with this over here doesn't have to move us away from our gift, that there's
Yeah.
something, that there's a way of working with this that bolsters it, but we don't
Mhm.
really lose anything over here. But
Mhm.
nonetheless, it, to your point, if we have a specific deficit, it is likely one side of a coin, and on the other side is a particular expression of gift.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So autism is really misunderstood in our culture. And in fact, people are uncomfortable with that word, even. And the very few people I have said, I believe I have autism too, and there's been like 3 people, 4 people, each one of them has had a layer of resistance to that, to me sharing that with them. In part because people don't like labels, in part because people, I don't know, want to think of me as a normal person, I guess. I don't
Yeah.
know, like, or
Well,
have an idea, a concept of me that, like, when I say actually I have this thing that most people think of as a disability or a weird thing to have,
yeah.
it's,
I
too
mean, certainly,
uncomfortable.
yeah. I mean, sharing my experience, right? Like, you come forward and basically say, I think I have autism, and I'm going, what? But to your point from earlier, it's because the atypical female expression of that is not really understood or communicated.
Yeah.
And I'll let you get into that, but there's been some things that as you've talked about this and I've learned more about it, and I sort of feel into how our relationship works and other things I've perceived, I go, yeah, okay. I guess I can see a thing or two here. Yeah. Which I'll perhaps share here in a moment.
Sure. So most people's concept of what it means to be autistic comes from Asperger's syndrome, which has a terrible history. I don't know if anyone knows this history, but Dr. Asperger was a Nazi doctor whose job was to separate people out who had autism. He separated out the highly intelligent, highly functional ones and put them to work in the concentration camps. And all of the ones that were low functioning were killed, just immediately sent to
That we're
concentration
low
camps.
functioning. That's what you
Low
said.
functioning or
Yeah.
dumb
Yeah.
were killed off. So it has like a gross
Yeah.
and so within the culture of autism and the autism community, there's a lot of discomfort with that word because it separates like the good ones from the bad ones.
Right.
So there's that to contend with. But anyway, the research is mostly on male children. There are millions of studies on autism. Most of them are on boys. There's only maybe 20 or 25 that are on women, solely women. And there's a few that have mixed gender. And it's because it's hard to diagnose women with autism. They show up differently. So your typical autistic person doesn't look like me at all. Everybody probably knows somebody on the spectrum who speaks with a monotone, doesn't have many facial expressions, doesn't really know how to smile, doesn't have great body language, not responsive in conversation, so like monosyllabic words, yes, no, I don't know, but then can go on a whole long speech about something that they really know a lot about. But they can't talk about they can't do small talk. They can't, they tend to say no to almost everything. They don't want to go out and meet new people. They like to stay home. They're usually very happy living a very small life because it's a safe life. And they have their, favorite people around them, 2 or 3 people maybe, and they stay in the same job for their whole career because why would you logically leave a job that you know exactly what to expect? It's much better to just stay in this one position and just do it for your whole life as long as you can. And maybe they're excellent in science and math. Like that's the stereotype. Somebody who's a genius at science and math, but doesn't have people skills.
Mm-hmm.
That is your typical autistic person, and they're mostly men. The other stereotype of autistic people is that they just flap their arms around, or like hit themselves in the head, or they're nonverbal. They have to be in special ed. They can't function. They don't know how to cook. They don't know how to take care of themselves. They have to live with their parents their whole lives. They function
Yeah.
at, elementary school or lower. So this is the fear that people have around autism, that it looks like that.
That it looks like special needs, that there's a one-to-one
Yeah,
relationship there. Yeah.
right. But a lot of people with autism are highly intelligent and or genius level IQs. Not the ones that are nonverbal, obviously. Not the ones that are, doing those things, those special needs kind of
Mm-hmm.
not stereotype,
Behaviors. Yeah.
expression, But there are a lot of people walking around the world who just kind of feel like they don't fit in, and they have some of these certain characteristics, which I'm going to talk about. And they have what most people would call mild autism, or high functioning autism, or low support needs autism. Now, all of that's kind of a fallacy, which I'll get into in a little bit. But first, I want to talk about what are some of the traits of
Okay.
autism. So one of them is there can be deficits or difficulties with proprioception. You don't really know where your body is in space, or you're trying to explore where your body is in space. So, for instance, kids who walked on their toes. There's a high correlation with that, with either sensory processing difficulties or autism. You'll see people with autism, they move their bodies a lot. They might spin or dance, or often they'll bump into the wall, because they just don't have the same level of proprioception that a neurotypical person has. So they get a lot of bruises. And I was a clumsy child when I was young. So I was always tripping, falling down. I had lots of scrapes on my legs. And it wasn't from doing like daredevil stuff like you.
Right.
I wasn't jumping off the roof. I wasn't like doing wheelies.
Yeah.
Is that a word? Wheelies?
Yes.
Okay. I wasn't doing wheelies. I wasn't like doing anything dangerous. I climbed a tree, and I mostly was on the ground. But I was always scraped up and bruised, getting stitches. I mean, I had stitches like 3 times. From basic things like standing, falling over from a standing position.
Just standing up and then suddenly falling over.
I just fell over.
Okay.
Nobody pushed me. That happened twice. And I remember my childhood best friend saying, like, why are you so clumsy? You're always breaking everything. Like, I broke several things of hers accidentally, just not being coordinated. And I never did sports. I did do dance, and I think that did actually support my coordination, because I became more coordinated through like accessing dance, being a part of dance. Yeah. So another one is interoception, which is like having a sense of your own body. This would be, I guess, corresponding to Myers-Briggs internal sensation. Is that a thing?
Yeah.
Introverted sensation.
Introverted sensation. Yeah.
Yeah. So one of alexithymia is like a fancy name for I can't tell you how I feel. I don't have the words for it. I know exactly how I feel, but I do not know how to translate that into a name. Like, what would this be? Sad, angry, hungry, tired. And
how can we say that one knows how they feel without? Is that really your experience of this? That people know how they feel, they just don't have a word, or that they literally can't tune in to whether or not they're happy or sad or angry, and like they don't know the difference between being angry and sad in their body?
Well, I can tell you my experience. One of the reasons why I wrote so much poetry is to try to understand how I was feeling. So I had a sensation going on, and I'm like, I don't know what this is. Let me just try to give it a voice. And so I write a poem. And by the end of it, I'd be like, oh, I'm angry. I'm angry.
Okay. Okay.
That's what that sensation is. So you know that there's something there. You're not numb. It's not a sense of numbness.
Okay.
There's a knowing of the sensation. There's a feeling that something's happening, but you don't know how to express it to others. And I remember Remember when I had that brain scan in our office, the brain
I
mapping
do.
people?
Yeah.
That was like one of the things that popped up was inability to verbally express what you're feeling, like say it in words. So that's kind of interesting. That just came up to
Yeah.
mind. And sometimes people with autism, they don't know when they're hungry, they don't know when they're thirsty, and they don't have as much of a sense of when they have to use the bathroom. And so I've had all of those
Hmm.
things over my life, like
Okay.
where I have held my urine for hours when I really should have gone like 4 hours sooner. It's like at some point I just don't even perceive it. I'm like, I literally don't perceive it at all. And then I'm like, it's been 5 hours since I've gone to the toilet. Wow.
Wow.
Jesus. Stuff like that. It's more often that happening at work than at home. Um, I've had a long history of undereating
Right.
because I literally am like, nothing sounds good. I don't really want anything. I'm just not going to eat. And thirst is hard for me too. Like I
Hmm.
have to make myself drink. And there are days where I'm successful with that, and there are days that I am not successful remembering to drink.
Yeah. Okay.
So it has to literally be in front of me. If I have the water like in my visual range, I will drink the water.
Mm.
But I am not so tuned into my thirst. So the next little category is emotional intensity. So, and I hate this. I don't like the way people talk about this, but autism people say that they have meltdowns or shutdowns.
Hmm.
And I hate those words because a meltdown is something a toddler does.
Right.
It's like a temper tantrum. But what it looks like practically speaking is there's so much emotion or so much overstimulation that you're crying and you don't know why. You're angry and you're like smashing something and you don't even know like how did I get to this place?
Mm.
I was calm and then not all of a sudden.
Hmm.
Um there can be some people with autism, and I have felt this at times, situational mutism, where you just have nothing to say. Like you literally cannot speak. And I remember I've told this story, maybe on this podcast,
Yeah.
of like getting married.
Yeah.
And I got to the front and I literally could not say my vows. I was so overwhelmed. And it was really illogical to me because I felt like I don't know why this is difficult. I don't really feel like I don't want to get married to this person. I have no idea why I can't speak. But I literally took me 5 minutes to be able to speak again.
Mm.
I was completely mute. And that has happened at other times. I know you've seen me at times where I'm like, I don't know, I got nothing. I can't say, I don't know what to say. I can
Yeah.
only tell you what I don't know, that I don't know what to say. But I have nothing more useful to say than that. Um, so those are some of the signs of emotional intensity. And it's important to note that neurotypical people do not have that. They may have times when they're very reactive, but they don't have this intense emotional outbursts that people with autism have. Um, then there are communication differences. And this is one of the tricky parts because people with autism learn to communicate carefully and they follow cues and they study people. And I definitely relate to this in that every single person that I talk to, I have a really good sense of what they want to hear and what they want to talk about and what they're not willing to talk about. And I try to stay within those like barriers.
Hmm.
Because and it's harder when I meet people for the first time because I'm like, I don't know what to talk about with this person. I know nothing about them. Okay, let me just like go for it, I guess, see what happens. So there are a couple of different interesting things that autistic people do. Like they might make little sounds with their voices. I mean, Jake does this. He's always clicking,
Hmm.
doing these honestly, it's rather annoying at times. These sounds that now I understand why he's doing them. So I can still tell him to be quiet, but
Sure.
I'm going to mostly allow him to do it and just move away if I need to. Um, there can be a real difficulty with eye contact, and I'm one of the atypical types in the way my eye contact shows up. I tend to be a starer. Like I use way more eye contact than other people are comfortable with, and I get feedback on that frequently. that people will say like, I feel like you're staring into my soul. And I'm like, well, I kind of am actually. Like not on purpose, like not to be intrusive, but the way that I make eye contact can be really uncomfortable for
Yeah.
people. And I always assumed that was just my level of concentration. Like when I'm concentrating, I'm going to be more intense with my eye contact. Like I'm literally trying to understand you, and my brain is working very hard. So in social settings, I'm not so much of a starer. But a lot of like your typical autistic people have a lot of difficulty with eye contact and struggle to make it. And in fact, like if you run into someone with autism and you notice that, you can bring it up with them and say, please feel free to make whatever level of eye contact feels good to you. And I think that relieves a lot of people's anxiety,
Hmm.
because when people are in society and trying to like force the eye contact, it can be very stressful. Other communication differences, people who are neurotypical are pretty happy with small talk, and they kind of talk about, they can talk about everything just a little bit. And it doesn't go very deep though. Most of the time, it's not going to go very deep. And people with autism want to go very deep, and they want to get into the nitty gritty, and they want to ask the big questions, and they are deep thinkers. And they usually only want to talk about what they like to talk about and aren't that interested in talking about other people's things.
Hmm.
So this is me on the porch with Antonio and you as you're talking about rockets or whatever the fuck you're talking about. And I'm like, la di da da, tuned out in my own little world because I have nothing to add to the conversation about rockets. I don't know anything about them. And then also the other thing that I know you and I have struggled with is tangential conversations, where I am like going here with the conversation, and then I'm going here with the conversation, I'm going here with the conversation. And those steps make perfect sense to me because I have a linear process of thoughts that I was thinking
Right.
out. And I'm only inviting you to these like, different areas of the conversation. It makes no sense to you at all. The way that I've just bounced around.
Right.
Perfect sense to me. And so sometimes I'll say, okay, I got there because of X, Y, and Z. I don't know if that's a useful strategy or not, but sometimes I like to explain why I seem crazy, why I seem like I'm all over the place. So that's a common feature of autistic communication, that there's lots of tangents and also, really deep around certain aspects of the conversation, and people tend to check out when the conversation moves into a direction that they either have no purpose, like they don't have a sense of purpose in that conversation, like they can't offer anything or aren't interested. They'll just tune out.
Okay. So my experience of you with this is, well, this gets into, I think, the part about how to be in relationship with somebody who exhibits these traits and characteristics. So your communication style, we've joked where at some point I just learned that you had this sort of meandering path of tangents that made sense to you, even though it doesn't make sense to me. And it's not just that, it's that you would sort of start at like step 3.2 and what you really want is the answer that comes after step purple, right? Because there's no coherence to the steps. They're not just numbers, they're numbers and letters and colors and trees and all kinds of things. So and so I learned to sort of detect that. And yes, some of it was annoying to me. There's no doubt about that. But it became clear to me at some point how to perceive the energy where you were, and when you were asking a question that was really several steps removed from the answer you actually wanted. And so you would ask a question and I would just say, what do you actually want to know? Right. And you would go, right. And so you would stop and
I'd
jump
have to reprocess it
to that and reprocess, which has worked for us, right? Because it keeps me from being sort of dragged through your insane autistic mind, and and it gets you your answer more quickly, right? Sure. But at the same time, there's something here where you're willing to work with that.
Hmm.
You've been willing to sort of recognize, oh, uh, this is a problem, I guess. Yeah, that's a little bit of a loaded term, but this is an area of deficit for me, and it can create problems or unneeded difficulty. And if I'm willing to allow somebody to help bring me into balance, then it actually makes life better for everybody.
Well, there's two possible truths in there. Well, there's
Right.
probably many, but there's that for sure. I have learned to be more direct in my communication. I've learned to take everything that I want to say and like bring it down to here.
Mhm.
And in part, that's because I recognize you have, and lots of people don't have the processing for like the long meandering story. Like focus wise, it's easier for me to ask you one question at a time and make it a very direct question.
Mhm.
It's just simpler. And so it's probably both of our deficits,
Yeah.
that I've
Working
learned to
together.
communicate more
Mhm.
efficiently with you, um, just more efficiently. And I know a lot of times in the past, I may have asked a question that is three steps down, like something like, "What are you doing on Friday?" Blah, blah, blah. And you're like, "What do you really want to know?" And I'm like, "Okay, let me think about this from his perspective. How do I rephrase this so that I get the answer that I need? Even though I really do want to know what you're doing on Friday at X, Y,
Yeah.
and Z, like I have to think about it from how your brain works and redirect the communication. Like, I need you to pick me up at X or
Exactly.
whatever,
Yeah. I mean,
you know?
that's such a great point, because that really is sort of the two-way street, and understanding how our brains work differently, right? And it's not just, that's an example of it's not just I'm sort of annoyed by the way that you're communicating, right? And I'm impatient and I want you to get to the end. It's the way that my brain works is so fundamentally different than when you ask a question that generic, I literally have no idea how to answer it. I'm like,
By the way, that's a sign of autism.
okay. Well, I have everything
Whatever.
apparently. Yes,
I actually
the entire
think,
Venn diagram is me.
yeah,
Um,
I have that also. Like when
yeah,
someone asks me a question that's a super open-ended question, I'm like, in which direction would you like me to take that? I
yeah,
could literally go like 50 different places.
right. Like I wouldn't know what to do with that other than, well, I'm going to wake up around 6. I'm going to drink coffee. I'm going to go to the gym. Like, and
Yeah, yeah.
when I get to the part of my day that's of interest to you and your question, you let me know and I'll stop.
Yeah, so you and I, without having labels or names to this, have sort of understood the differences in how we communicate and learn to work with them. I think for me, an important part of that has been recognizing that there's absolutely nothing wrong with you or your brain.
Right,
I just need to figure out how to communicate with your brain
right,
and with you.
right.
Instead
And
of like, why the fuck can't you just answer my question of what you're doing at 4 p.m. on Friday?
right, right. And
I
similarly,
asked
I
you
don't.
a question.
Right, and I don't get frustrated with you for starting, right, 3 paces in and 2 to the right, and in the middle of your elaborate dance, and I have no idea that music is even playing, right? I don't get mad or frustrated with that. I don't expect you to be different. I don't need you to be different. Uh, but we have the freedoms for, when that happens, I can say, I can help redirect you to something that's more efficient and right.
Yeah, yeah. I want to finish the list of autistic signs. And then
Okay.
I do want to go back over a couple and just share my own direct experience. And maybe we can do some of the things that are consistent with ADHD for you and how I support you in those. And so people can understand like some of the benefits of being in a relationship with awareness around some of these differences, how that can actually make for a really great partnership, like
Mhm.
truly a partnership, not a codependent partnership, which is a whole
Right,
other thing,
right,
but truly a partnership.
right.
So, another thing that is common with autism is something called rejection sensitivity, which is you're so used to being rejected for how you really are that you avoid it. So you are actually a very introverted, withdrawn person, and or you are high masking, meaning however people are around you, you're going to put on the appearance of those people. And this used to be a huge problem for me because I would change my personality. This is what, in psychology you call losing yourself in relationship. I
Mm,
literally would put on the personality, likes and dislikes of anyone I was with. Doesn't matter who it was.
mhm,
I'm going to know. And now I recognize things like I was married to an African American man, and I didn't know how to fit into that world. So I listened to a lot of rap, and that was like my new favorite music, and hip hop and R&B. And I went to clubs that were mostly filled with Black people, and I read God, like 25 books on gangs. I mean, that wasn't even where he was from, but I'm just trying to understand the culture and know how to fit in.
mm,
So I'm researching madly to understand this new world that I found myself in so that I wouldn't feel like an outsider,
right.
feel like I belonged in some way just by having some intellectual awareness. And I wouldn't make a faux pas because I was always making a faux pas at first in that relationship. I mean, no matter, it's like the amount of insensitive things that came out of my mouth just because I didn't know that that was an insensitive thing. And
Right.
fortunately, my ex-husband was fairly patient with me and fairly kind
Yes.
as I went through that process. But
And now you have been retrained by your daughter.
yeah, I mean, totally.
Yeah.
I rely on my biracial daughter to explain to me what it's like to be biracial because I don't know what that means.
Right.
I'm not biracial. I don't have any lived experience. So I literally see her as a tremendous resource for me
Yeah.
for understanding what it is to be even to some degree what it is to be a teenager. Because I think of, other people would have looked at my teenage years and thought typical teenager. I felt like I was a weirdo when I was a teenager because I was so frightened and like I didn't go to parties. I wouldn't know what to do at a party to begin with. I didn't drink. I didn't have like I had some friends, but they were all like nerdy people.
Mhm.
Um, I wasn't your normal teenager. I was very straight laced and sheltered. So anyway, and then a lot of autistic people make friends through their special interests. So if you look at all of my every friend that I've ever made in my life, I have met because of some special interest of mine.
Mhm.
I don't just meet people out on the street and like, you're a cool person, let's hang out together. It's always through psychology, through as met you as a client, became a friend, or I was into bodybuilding and my very best friend now is someone I met in that community. So those are the relationship differences. Neurotypical people can make friends easily and make friends all over the place. It doesn't matter the social situation because they are more comfortable with a wide variety of people and talking about all kinds of things. Yeah. Um, Autistic people do have some executive functioning deficits, including deficits slash gifts. They're
Mhm.
both. One of them is hyperfocus. The good thing about hyperfocus is that when you want to crank something out, you can crank it out and it's going to be maybe very, very good, incredibly powerful or incredibly beautiful or whatever. Um, Unfortunately, you could forget to eat, you could forget to go to work, you could forget to take care of yourself in some way, you could forget to get other shit done, email people, call, whatever. Um, there is something very interesting called pathological demand avoidance that some people think of as a subset of autism.
Mhm.
And that is something I have definitely dealt with. Pathological demand avoidance is the experience of when someone wants you to do something for them, you struggle to do that thing. If it comes from within you and you want to do the thing, it's easy. Like um, the sense of obligation. So an
Yeah.
example of that for me was when I was learning piano. I had a piano teacher who gave me a piano book, and I had to play the piano pieces in order. And they were meant to be done that way. so that you could, over time, place things that were a little bit harder and a little bit harder and a little bit harder. I freaking hated that. I wanted to play piece number 22, piece number 44, and piece number 50. None of the other stuff. I don't want to play any of it. And so following that linear, like you have to learn in this order, has always been very uncomfortable for me and just made me angry and frustrated. And at times made me just want to quit. I just gave up because I don't want to learn that way. You're not going to make me learn that way. So, it helps me understand some of the things that I've had resistance to, that, I've judged myself for them, because I'm like, well, what nice person doesn't want to do this thing for their family member? It's like, well, that person's asking me to do it. If I would have been my idea, I would, like, me, I would 110% go above and beyond for most people.
Mhm.
If it's coming from within me and I have the energy to do that. But if someone's telling me I have to do something, it's like, I hate that. So that's one of the little interesting areas of autism. There's something called autistic inertia. I literally had it today. I laid down on the bed for a moment and then I couldn't get off the bed. And I had to, like, tell myself, no, you have shit to do, and, like, force myself to move on to the next thing. It's like the feeling, like feeling stuck in a place, like you don't have the energy to go on to the next thing.
Mm.
And it can also be, like when you're hyper focused on one thing, very difficult for you to change to a different task. It's like you have almost a resentment, like, why are you dragging my attention away from this thing and making me do, or, having to go to work or whatever you have to do, like changing gears. My mom used to call it changing gears.
Mm.
I used to have trouble with that. I still have trouble with that. Yeah. There's something called SPINS. It's like an acronym. It stands for special interests. So your typical autistic person has maybe more of a tendency to have a special interest in the land of objects and things, like dinosaurs, cars, trucks, rockets,
Gadgets,
gadgets,
doodads.
doodads, yeah, EDC, everyday carry. Like whatever your, special interest thing, it's going to be about things. Atypical autistic people, which are more commonly women, they're going to have special interests that are maybe like other people, and also about people, very often about people or about themselves. A special interest would be like the study of me. I'm going to find out everything about myself. So my special interests have been psychology, spirituality, gangs for a while. There was a whole period of time that I was obsessed with vampires. I read books about vampires for about a decade of my life. I've been obsessed with the World War II. I've been obsessed with the Civil War. These are very common. Like if you poll autistic people, many people will say the Civil War. It's like a funny little weird thing that for whatever reason people are interested in. It's common. So yeah, your typical autistics will be obsessed with things more often or have more special interest in those areas. Atypical are going to be interested in relational type topics. That includes intense research that sometimes makes it hard to do other things in your life because you're so like, all I want to, and you've seen me in this phase where I'm like, all I want to do is know about this thing. I don't want to go to work. I don't want to talk to anyone. I just want to read. Leave me alone so I can research. There's a sense of like information hunger, like you can't know enough about it. Like you just want to know more and more and more. And then oftentimes, like abruptly, it'll change. And you're like, okay, I'm over that thing. I don't care about it anymore. I don't need to research it, know anything more about it. Don't even want to talk about it. Moving on to the next thing. So in typical autism, the special interests are often throughout the life. Atypical autism, they tend to change quickly. And then having collections of things is very common for people who are autistic. Collect rocks, collect memorabilia, collect whatever, different things. There's two more, so for your own focus.
my, my ADHD is in overdrive.
So stims are physical movements that help a person release energy. And there can also be internal stims like thought patterns, repetitive thoughts that people do to like stimulate. I have both internal and external stims that I do. Sometimes when I'm really excited, I do flap my hands. I don't think anyone has ever seen this, ever. Like it often happens when I'm very, very excited or I have something to do and I'm like, ah, like that with my hands.
I mean, I've seen that.
Have you seen that? Oh my God.
Sometimes when I just walk around the corner.
Oh, that's so cute.
And you're taken by surprise.
Oh, that's true. Yeah. Okay. So you have seen that. That's so funny. I feel like that's like my deepest secret. It's not really, but I don't remember ever doing it in front of anyone. Like just little nitpicky things that I do with my body. I mean, you've seen me do this now a few times in this conversation, trying to stretch my back, trying to get more comfortable because there's a lot of sensory information that I feel in my body right now. The more nervous I get, the more I stim. Sometimes I hear songs repetitively in my head. That's kind of like a mental stim, like the lyrics are going through my head like repeatedly. Like for whatever, like Taylor Swift has been going through my head a lot lately because I keep listening to that music because when I like a music, I'm going to listen to it like until I'm sick of it. Yeah, and then also like repetitive movements. Like when my kids were babies, I was always like stroking them, playing with their hair. I used to play with Mia's hair all the time until finally she was like, stop playing with my hair. And I stopped. And sensory seeking is another way to stim, like crunchy, like I said, crunchy food, smoking cigars, like for me sometimes is I want the sensation of the smoking. I don't care about the taste. I don't care about that. I just want to feel like the action of smoking.
I'm definitely never giving you any of the good cigars anymore.
I'm saying sometimes. Okay. Like there are other times where I'm like super into the taste, and that's another sensory seeking thing. Usually if I say I want this kind of cigar, it's because I'm not just for the smoking.
You're not in autism mode.
Right. Or maybe I am, I don't know. And then the last one is exteroception, which is sensing the outside world. And most people with autism are a mix of hypersensitive and hyposensitive. So you can be, this one for me is actually a big problem. This is one of the ways that autism actually can feel disabling for me, because it limits my ability to interact with other people comfortably. So for me, probably my biggest thing is visual information and auditory information. If there are really loud sounds, it will really trigger me and be very dysregulating for my nervous system. Like, I don't know if you remember going to the movie with the planes, Tom Cruise, Top Gun 2. And I was like literally shaking for like 45 minutes after. Yeah. And I had earplugs in the whole time. There was just so much visual stimulation and so much auditory stimulation that I felt really kind of gross for a while. It took a little while for my body to like rest and relax. That wouldn't be a problem for someone who's neurotypical. They would go into that and be like, yay, that was amazing. I loved everything about it. It was loud and good. Roller coasters, can't do them. I can't really do any of that stuff. I like spinning, rides that spin, but anything where I'm going up and down and most other rides, I literally am so overstimulated and uncomfortable with them that I won't go on them. So it makes me kind of a bummer at the amusement park. Just not good. And you know, from like four-wheeling, what's it called? Off-roading. Yeah. I'm like gripping the handle on the car like with a death grip. Yeah. Because it's so intense for me to go off-roading. Like the first time I was absolutely horrified the entire time. And as we continue to do it, I'm getting more and more comfortable because I'm understanding the logic of the off-roading and how like actually nothing can really happen as long as you're not near a cliff, and as long as you're not overheating. And it's like a repeated experience now. So as I'm getting more exposed to it, I'm more comfortable. I
Mm,
feel more and more relaxed, but I'm still like gripping the
yeah,
handle.
yeah.
And then sometimes I'm hyposensitive where I feel really numb and shut down, and there could be a bomb that goes off, and I'm like, okay, I think I heard a noise. I'm a very light sleeper. Like anything that's
Yeah.
happening, I'm attuned and aware of the sounds. And so now I wear earplugs and an eye mask to try to manage some of that
Mhm.
hypersensitivity, so that I can actually rest. So that's all of the things. And so, generally speaking, for it to be diagnosed, you have to have like multiple characteristics in each one of these areas, and you have to have had them for your whole life. And you have to have about at least 60% of these, they say, these
Mm.
qualities you need to demonstrate. And the reason why is because here's a major confounding factor is that some people have a lot of these characteristics, but they're at the result of having trauma in their life.
Right.
And so you can be very sensitive to noise and sound and all of that. And you can have difficulty with relationships and very emotional. Um, but that can be because you experienced complex trauma throughout your life, or you even had one trauma. So it's important to be able to look at the whole lifespan clearly, and think back to how you were as a child and as you've developed, to be able to rule out whether this is coming from trauma or from neurodivergent brain. So that's a little bit of, oh, do you have anything else to say about how you've noticed this in me, or what your experience of me has been?
Well, we talked a little bit about the communication piece, and
Mhm.
um, I can remember there's been a couple times, not often, but I one in particular I distinctly remember of us like being out to lunch and in line, and like the line was kind of slowly progressing, and like I kind of turned around and looked at the menu and turned back, and you were standing like this far away from the person in front of you, and like I literally grabbed you and pulled you back. I'm like, what are you doing?
Oh,
like
I don't even remember that.
give this person some space.
Mm,
And you just were kind of oblivious about your spatial orientation relative to somebody else.
that is a common autistic quality.
Yeah, and there's other times when that's true, like you're sort of like not really comprehending the physics of navigating, like getting by me. You'll or predicting the way that we're sort of moving in the kitchen, or whatever, and like you're just like, right, I'm like, okay. um so yeah, exteroception, yeah.
Yeah,
So, spatial orientation, all that kind of stuff, like it's definitely there, yeah.
sure.
So the trauma piece, so that again it takes me back to, again, this is the sort of quote masculine contextual perspective on all of this, right, where in a sense there's, for me anyway, there's sort of a arbitrariness as to whether we look at something like this through a lens of a label like autism or ADHD versus a lens of trauma, or to me the word I want to use is conditioning,
Hmm.
because there's non-traumatic conditioning, right? Like not all conditioning has to be traumatic, but the issue is that the nervous system has been conditioned to operate in a certain way. And so part of why I've had resistance in our conversations to sort of sticking a label, and again, I want to make this clear, I'm not denying the presentation, right? The presentation fits.
Hmm.
um and I know that it's perfectly fine for me as an individual to sort of observe this, recognize where there's value, and know there's absolutely no value in me labeling myself something here. I've spent my whole life working out of labels and definitions and identity and identification. So admittedly, I do project or transpose that onto people in general. And I sit over here in this perspective of, I don't want to encourage people to identify with a particular label. I think it's great for them to come to know that there's a certain constellation of symptoms that many people have, symptoms, deficits, whatever word we want to use. But to me, I look at all of this as there's conditioning, and even if it's in the nervous system, if it's been conditioned in, it can be conditioned out. And I know that this isn't 100%. I'm sort of intentionally standing in a extreme position here just to share some of what the stumbling blocks are. So I think you have a slide perhaps about differentiating trauma from the specific conditioning as expressed in these terms, ADHD and or.
Yes, and I will show that. I just want to say that one of the reasons why I have been exploring autism as a lens for self-awareness is because I have tried to condition out of my nervous system all of these things. I mean, everything that I'm explaining, most things I have tried to make them conscious. I have tried to disguise them. I've tried to do clearing around them, and I've worked with them in all kinds of ways. And so my experience now as a person who's done a lot of healing work is that I have a lot of awareness around the things that I'm doing and the things that I'm thinking and the things that I'm saying. And I have developed a really adaptive way of being in the world and working with my own self. But I recognize that I have a lot of stress. And by stress, I mean physiological stress. I measured that, and I've been trying to work on that for at least a year of concentrated effort to reduce my stress. And I think actually having the label of autism has reduced my stress because instead of expending my energy in trying to eliminate these qualities in myself, like my hypersensitivity, like the fact that it stresses me out so much to have loud noise around me, like the fact that I can't watch violent television, things like that, things that have confused me and kept me seeking and trying to fix myself. Now I'm like, oh, it's just part of my nervous system is upregulated right now. It's maybe always tending towards that position because of autism or neurodivergency. And so I just know that I need to put earplugs in, and I know that I need to watch things that I actually make me feel good instead of trying. I mean, you know what? You've seen me over the years try to re-engage with television that's more intense and test it out. How am I now? Can I watch a horror movie? Can I watch a scary thing where, like, in 3 seconds, someone's head's getting cut off? Sometimes I can, and sometimes I really can't.
Yeah,
I just
usually you can't.
Usually I can't.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, I've done complete clearings on this.
Yeah.
And now I'm just like, fuck it, I don't care. I can't watch that shit.
Right. So yeah, I mean, I like that. And to me, I mean, anything that moves us, and this is where I'll come out of this other stance and kind of come back into sort of the more balanced place that I've begun to engage with this. Anything that gives us more permission to be ourselves is a good thing. Provided that experience of being ourself isn't problematic for us in some way, that we're conscious of it and its influence, which you certainly are, and which I certainly am in my life as well. Right. Um, most people are not conscious of it. And so that takes me back to this other position of, I think it's a mistake if somebody sort of identifies with one of these labels, takes the label on, and then uses it to justify continuing to be in the world in a way that they then turn around and complain about, or that actively is causing them stress, grief, difficulty,
Mhm.
and they will say, I want the stress, grief, and difficulty to go away. I don't want to experience this anymore, but they're not willing to work on the behavior or
Grow and evolve within it. Yeah.
yeah.
Mm.
So but again, that's no different than really any other situation or label or whatever, or model of the world, or model of the psyche, or way of, or lens of perceiving and understanding these sorts of things. We have to be careful not to get stuck in them. But
What?
again, what you've just shared, the energy of that to me is, this gave you an understanding of yourself and helped something click, where you recognized that you have done the work that needs to be done, and that there isn't a problem here other than thinking there's a problem here.
Right.
Right. And when we get
Yes.
to that point, then I'm all on board that this is super helpful, because it gives us permission to just be who we are. And
Mhm.
so that's certainly, again, that's true for me. I just sort of know, unless I am ready to dive into some other deeper exploration, or try, put in a great deal of undue effort to overcoming some of my deficits, so to speak. I just sort of know every now and then I'm going to lose something. And as long as I'm okay with that, then I'm okay with that. Right.
Right.
Or am I not going to find something? Or in the relationship side, letting myself lean on you. Right. Um, which is wonderful. And in a previous iteration, because of the unconsciousness, that would have been codependency.
Mhm.
Right. And so there's another distinction. Um, but because we've become conscious of this, and I know that, like, if you weren't around, I can take care of myself, and I'll find a way to get this stuff done. It's not my favorite thing, but I'll do the laundry, and I'll fold my clothes, and I'll mow the lawn, and blah blah blah. Right. But because we have a relationship that where together we can complement one another, suddenly we can allow ourselves the freedom to do that in a non-codependent way, and both of our lives get much better.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. And I want to add too that knowing, just as a therapist and as a partner and as a mother, well, all the other roles in my life, my relationship roles, knowing about neurodivergency has made me feel more loving and compassionate towards other people, because I know that not everything is explained away by trauma. And so the things that aren't explained away by trauma have historically been very hard for me to cope with in other people. So, for example, I don't know, some of the idiosyncrasies of my parents, for instance. Um, Autism and ADHD are genetic. That's what the research is finding. And so
Right.
just knowing that, I can see my parents and my whole family, my brother, my sister, everyone through a much more compassionate lens. Like, okay, if trauma is not a cause for this relationship dynamic difficulty, maybe it's neurodivergency. And I simply don't understand their brain and their perspective. And I need to either ask more questions or be more relaxed around this, or just, you know, let it go. And this lens has given me the permission to just be more at ease with everyone.
Yeah.
Like, okay, that person has a different brain than I do. It's just another way for me to grow more compassionate and accepting. So I find it useful in that way. I will say that from the research that I've done, especially listening to people on YouTube and TikTok who talk about how they experience being diagnosed, it tends to follow a pattern where people feel very alienated and like they don't belong. They are struggling, they go and get a diagnosis. There's immediately a huge sense of relief. Like, okay, there's an explanation for why I feel this way, and it's not a failing of mine. It comes from how I'm made, and
Mhm.
it's not bad how I'm made. It just comes with this package of stuff. And then there's grief and anger that comes after that for all of the missed opportunities in their life, for all of the support that they could have gotten if someone had known and didn't get.
Mm.
And then there's a sense after that, and that's what I think you're pointing at. You see people in grief and anger and victimhood, but they don't stay there. Then after that, there's a sense of relaxation, acceptance, and belonging. And, I've seen so many creators say, I never felt like I belonged anywhere, but I belong in the autistic community. I know how other autistic people think and feel. And
Mhm.
so here I have community. I'd never had community before, but here I have community. And so I think overall, the process of being diagnosed, whether you do it like via yourself or you go and get professionally diagnosed, can be a huge liberation process for people.
Mhm.
Although there is the group of people who will get stuck in victimhood and then stuck in over identification with their diagnosis. It doesn't seem to be the trend for most people, but I have like a month of watching TikTok, so I don't know. I don't know all the whole story. Yeah. Um, yeah, so I think, I'd like to just share a couple of the ways that I support you, and then maybe you can share some of the ways that you support me when you see me doing my thing. Um, so, for a long time in our relationship, I was very wary of supporting you um, in the ways that I could tell that you needed support because I didn't want to disempower you, and because of direct feedback that you had given me, asking me not to disempower you. And so for a very long time, I just avoided that entirely. So when I saw you struggling, I mean that lightly. It's not like you were like really in a bad way. I would just let you be and just let it I mean, for a long time, for instance, with the laundry, I would fold the laundry and then leave it on your side of the bed because I'm like, okay, well, I'm helping in some ways, but not totally disempowering him. And he can put it away, except a lot of the times it would just get put in a basket um, instead of put away. Anyways, and so through this new lens of seeing that our brains have different deficits and we also have incredible skill areas, it's given us the permission to have a conversation about, how can I actually support you? Can I do these things for you? Do I have permission to do things like, um, can I buy you things that help you organize your life? Can I rearrange the bathroom and put all of your toiletries in a nice organized fashion that not only looks nice for me, because I like things when they look nice, but also is very functional for you and makes it easier for you to go about your grooming routine? Can I fold up your clothes for you? Can I put them away? Can I help you manage the laundry? Because that's an area that you just don't really give a shit about, or it's too much to deal with because you're exhausted or whatever the reason is. Um, can I help you find the lost things? One of the ways that I mostly unconsciously try to support you is when I see something that is yours that's not in a normal place that you put it, I make a note of that so that when you ask me later, where's my phone? I'm like, I saw it on the dryer.
Mhm.
I try not to move it because I try to give you the benefit of the doubt that you know it's there and that you've left it there on purpose. But I will often just make a note like that's out of place. I'm going to remember that so that if he is looking for that, I can tell him it's there. Um, yeah, I mean, just picking up after you, helping you sort things out. These are the ways that I support you in the areas that you struggle with. Um, and you support me in a lot of ways with the things that are harder for me, including, I mean, I'll let you say it, but including just being willing to not watch crazy shit on the
Mhm.
TV at night. Like, you don't expect me to watch shoot 'em up TV every night. And you
Right.
don't get mad at me that, at least I don't think you're mad at me, that I don't like that stuff.
Right.
I don't feel demeaned by that. I don't feel like you make me feel bad about not being able to tolerate that stuff.
Yeah. I mean, I think that, for me, the biggest thing is what you're sharing. It's that I'm always very conscious about the state of your nervous system, and typically very willing to default to what that needs. Right.
Mm,
Um, and so, for me, that's maybe changes of plans or behaviors or leisure activities or whatever. And again, it's important for people to understand that I'm not abandoning myself. I'm not sacrificing that's not the experience for me. Right. uh the experience for me is one of, this is something that's easy for me to do, and it helps you feel more comfortable, and it helps us be closer, it helps you be at more peace. There's benefits of that to me,
mhm,
and so I'm happy to do it. Right. But yeah, I mean, left to my own devices, right, I'd be playing loud music and watching, violent or action adventure or sci-fi all the time, every night. I'd
yeah,
be rock climbing on a regular basis, being away from you.
mhm,
Or, um, if I were dating somebody with a different nervous system, dragging that person to, come on, let's go. I want to go do this. I want to go hike a mountain, or go to the rock climbing gym, or do hardcore off-roading, or whatever. And it's like, that doesn't work for you. And none of it's that important to me.
yeah,
Right. And every now and then, when something is important enough for me, I just go and do it by myself. Right. Or
yeah.
ask you and invite you, hey, are you in the mood for this randomly? No, I'm not. That's what I figured, but thought I'd ask, and go about my
Sure.
business. Yeah, and just being willing to, I think, adapt the way that I live energetically to sort of accommodate your more sensitive nervous system. And then just always being available to you, uh, when you are overstimulated and you need to sit together and cuddle on the couch, or you need a hug, or you just need to talk. Right.
Mhm,
Like, there's a lot of that. And for the most part, um, 99% of the time, I'm happy to just kind of sit there and listen to what's going on for you. And
mhm.
I don't feel compelled to fix it or offer a suggestion or anything like that, because I know it's not really about that. It's just about, this is a part of how you process, which helps your nervous system to relax.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
Thank
then,
you for saying all that.
yeah. And then, I handle the more sort of mathy technical aspects of life, making the kind of financial arrangements and figuring out what to do when car leases are up and what's the best option, and all
Mhm.
planning, and doing the research around office mechanics, and pending office move and things like that.
Yeah, there are some things in my life that I absolutely can do by myself, and I learned how to do them when I was first divorced, that I recognize now I'm just not very good at. I'm just not very good at anything having to do with cars.
Yeah.
I don't understand cars. I don't know what the ter the way leases and loans work. Like, I don't understand any of that stuff. And yeah, I could spend, like, hours and hours of research to try to understand it, or I can, humble myself and say, "Noah, can you do this? Because I can't do it. I
Right.
I don't know how to do it, and I don't wanna learn." I just don't wanna learn. I mean, I could
Yeah.
learn, absolutely, I could learn. It wouldn't be the end of my life if I was learning this, and if I was single, I would have to learn it. But
Right.
I'm not
And
single, and I have a guy that I'm married to that is excellent at these things, and
yeah.
why not use the resources that are available to me,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Any more thoughts?
I'm all out of thoughts.
I guess I just want to leave this conversation saying that if you resonate with any of this, please do your own research. I will try to put in some resources for you into the comments of the YouTube video so that you can go down your own process of exploration. Obviously, neither one of us are qualified to label or diagnose anyone. We can't legally, and we don't know enough about it. We're not experts. The problem is that most psychiatrists and psychologists are also not experts. Neurodivergency is a not well understood. And in order to be diagnosed with ADHD, I do believe that you can go to a psychiatrist and they will give you the diagnosis, and it's a little easier. It's a little bit better understood. Autism is, like I said, not well understood. And if you show up as an atypical autistic person, you may not be diagnosed. And you will have to go through a very lengthy process of diagnosis that takes hours, like 40 hours. It takes anywhere from $2,500 to $5,000 to be diagnosed with autism, formally diagnosed. I think it's worth it for kids, honestly. I think it's worth it so that there are lots of accommodations that people with autism and ADHD can have in the classroom. You can have earplugs, you can wear, you can listen to music. I had my first experience this past weekend of taking I took my auriculotherapy exam, and I asked if I could play binaural beats and I haven't taken an exam in a long time. At 2015, I took one exam, but before that, it'd been many, many years. And I remember how uncomfortable it is for me to take exams and with other people around me because they're rustling, they're sighing, they're not even aware of all the noises they're making, and I can hear everything. So, being able to play music in my headphones made the whole testing experience simple. Being able to move around in the classroom, if you're a kid with autism and you need to stim or move, like the end result of learning is more important than the need for everyone to be sitting properly in the seat. So I would recommend people get their children diagnosed formally so that they can have accommodations. But if you're a grown-up and you do your research and you think, I think I do have ADHD, I think I do have autism. A lot of people in the neurodivergent community say that is enough. Like, you get to be autistic, you get to have ADHD, and you get to research how to accommodate yourself and advocate for yourself. And nobody else, no specialist, no neurotypical person should be able to tell you yes or no that you have this. So that's just my 2 cents on diagnosis. And I just want to encourage everyone, if you resonate with any of this, just to do your own research and don't take anything that I've said about my life experience or what I've, said about yours, like personally or to heart. Just do your own work because it's very nuanced. Yeah. Anything else for you?
No, that
Okay.
feels complete.
All right.
Okay.
Yay.
Thank you for informing us, love.
Thank you for listening to my special interest.
Okay. Bye, everybody.
Next time.